Again, my name's Courtney, program manager for NewsMatch. And today we're here to talk about a donor system. So what is a donor system? A donor system just refers to the various components, the many moving parts that really power your whole donation process. And it generally centers on a donation platform in which that actually works as an engine to process your donations. But that platform has all these other spokes, like it connects to a donor button, it can connect to your newsletter marketing tool, it connects to a payment processor, and it can connect to a CRM. All these components combined, this is what we're referring to as a donor system. But like, why, out of all the places to start and talk about NewsMatch, to start planning your year-end campaign, why are we starting with this topic? It kind of seems out of left field. But the reason why is because we're making changes to the donation platform that powers NewsMatch, and we want to provide newsrooms with a heads up on what that change is and what they need to do to make sure that their systems are in place so that they can be successful in the long term. So newsmatch.org, which is the screenshot you see on the screen right now, is a central website that we promote for people to discover and find the newsrooms that are participating in NewsMatch. It also is powered by a software called GiveGab, which is really designed to be a giving day software behind the scenes. When individuals make a donation on newsmatch.org, it's actually powered through GiveGab, and then that money is deposited into the accounts of participating newsrooms. While this has been pretty valuable for fresh new startups that have no donor systems, it really is highly redundant for a lot of INN members who have their own donor systems and platforms outside of newsmatch.org. And so the change that we're making this year is to really create this site, update the site to really be a discovery tool for people to find a path for them to find newsrooms and then donate on your existing donation pages. And in order to make this change, we realized that we are going to need to support newsrooms participating in NewsMatch to adopt a new donation system or to integrate or improve their existing donation system, particularly if they were heavily reliant on GiveGab in the past. And I will note that we are supporting GiveGab through the end of this year, through NewsMatch 2021. But in 2022, we're ending our contract with GiveGab. And so we're providing like a really early heads up for newsrooms to make sure that their systems are in place for 2022 after NewsMatch has ended. What can you expect in this new system? It's super exciting. Again, like, instead of newsmatch.org being a site that is really geared toward process donations, which newsrooms don't always need, it's going to be more of a discovery site that actually should be pretty fun for the public to land on and for funders to land on, to dynamically search for newsrooms that fit their interest area and fit their geographic scope. You can think of it as almost a directory of INN members, but it has a very strong visual component. The search functionality is going to be a lot more intuitive, smart, and accurate in terms of the results that it drives. The other cool thing about this discovery site that we're looking to build is that newsrooms will be able to link directly to their existing donation pages versus having to process the donations through our system. And this is very valuable because in the long term, these donors enter into your profile, enter in your processes and workflow for stewardship versus having to export and import across systems. And it really sets you up for long-term success. The other thing that's going to be improved with this site is, our current newsmatch.org site isn't the most intuitive to use. And so by having more control and building our own discovery site, we're going to improve the navigation and user experience for donors that land on the site. I'll pause here. Miranda, are there any questions I should respond to at this point?
Yeah, there's one right now, but I think you're about to address it in a very upcoming slide. So I think we're good.
Okay, cool. Want to just get a quick poll. Go ahead and drop a +1 in the chat if your organization currently is solely reliant on GiveGab, on the tool that NewsMatch has provided in the past. Okay. The reason why I asked is because I want to make sure that newsrooms that are entirely dependent upon it, that we remain like in pretty close contact with you on how this is happening, what changes are happening to GiveGab, so that you are in good standing for 2022. As we go into NewsMatch 2021, again, just reiterating that it's going to be a transitional year. So GiveGab will still be functioning for NewsMatch 2021. And we're kind of going to be doing like a dual site during this transition year so that we're not just pulling the rug under people. So GiveGab is still going to be functioning, though I imagine not all newsrooms are going to be using it to the same degree, because we're going to have this new discovery search site that will have all the newsrooms listed. So it's not like you have to choose one or the other. You can actually be on both at the same time, where your profile is up on the discovery site, and when we ask for the donation link that you want us to point people to, you can give us your GiveGab link, or you can give us your link to your existing donor system. For those who have used GiveGab in the past, primarily because we've provided it as an option for NewsMatch, we want to make sure that we are also helping you transition in a way that is supportive of securing, of managing your donors that have come through that platform. So the first thing again is that we're going to still continue to process new and recurring donations through January of next year. Newsrooms, through your user accounts, you will retain access to your historical giving records and your donor information in perpetuity. And we are working with GiveGab now to provide 2 or 3 options that allow newsrooms to either continue using GiveGab if they really feel it is the best tool for them, and they can use it independently of NewsMatch, and also to make sure that recurring donations that were made during GiveGab are not interrupted and continue to process in perpetuity unless you would like those donors to move elsewhere. So you'll hear more about that later in the summer as we provide those options to newsrooms. So that's sort of the setup as to like why we're talking about this today. I want to introduce Miranda Kraft, who is a web and tech consultant, who's going to share kind of about the basics of like how to build your own donor system. You might recognize Miranda because she previously was a team member at INN on the labs team, and she's been meeting and doing one-on-one consultations with newsrooms really over the past 2 or 3 years. Also joining us is another familiar face, Christina Shee from News Revenue Hub. News Revenue Hub is a leading learning partner with NewsMatch and really brings a lot of digital fundraising expertise to all the resources that we provide newsrooms. So let's just start. We're just going to focus on the basics. What parts of the donation system do you specifically need for NewsMatch? This is sort of the basics. There are things that go beyond this list of 4 that newsrooms have, and we'll touch on one of them, which is a CRM. You don't see that listed here. But what we're saying is, for NewsMatch, these are really the 4 critical elements that are kind of like essential. And all this information is sort of outlined in a guide that we've created. All the information that we're sharing today during this webinar is sort of in written form. And Christina will drop the link into chat for you to get access to this guide or download and print. It kind of goes in further detail the information that we're sharing today. So with that said, I want to pass the mic to Miranda, who's going to talk about the first 2 essential components that you'll need for NewsMatch.
Great, thank you so much, Courtney. As Courtney said, we're really just kind of running through the very basics today in terms of what's involved with setting up a donor processing system, what's needed for NewsMatch, etc. So to start with that, we really want to start with the very basics of what the actual donation platform is. And as Courtney said, also a lot of this is spelled out in that guide. that she shared. And yes, please share any questions along the way. I'm happy to answer them as we go along. But so there's, a lot of different components to this, and we're going to start by talking about the donation platform itself. And, that's really the external facing portion of where you intake your donations. It's the form that people use. And then I'm also going to talk a little bit about how that goes into payment processing and what the difference is, et cetera. So starting with the kind of donor platform or donor processing itself. So there's really, that's the part that, there's two factors there, and one of them is the outward facing one, and that's what your donors will see when they're on your website. So that's the form where they can select how much they're donating, if they want to have it recurring, etc. And then it will connect to other systems, and we'll talk about that as we run through a little bit as well. We have kind of a list of common ones that come up often, and I think that might be on, is that on the next slide, Courtney? Yeah, excellent. Thank you so much. So the donation platform itself, again, is what your audience or your readers are using to make a donation on your website. And so behind the scenes, there's some other kind of processes and such involved there. But really, it's connected to your donate button, which we'll talk about later. It's on your website. It could be connected to your newsletter marketing tool, your payment processor, and as Courtney said, if you have a CRM, it's kind of a more advanced level as well. There's some common ones out there. Including, GiveGab, Kindful, DonorBox, Classy, GiveWP is another one that's commonly in there. And those are the ones that you see a lot, but there's really many different donation platforms out there. And there's a lot of different factors involved in choosing which one. And we're going to talk through kind of some of the best practices today as well. But let's dive into just a little bit more what's involved in these donation platforms. So this is this screenshot we have here is really the part that's outward facing. There is a question in there, and Courtney, I think maybe we'll circle back to that one in the end. But so this is the external facing portion of the donation page. It's where they enter their amount, if they want to do recurring, etc. But there's really a lot more to that in terms of a donation platform that you should consider. And we'll go on to the next slide. Perfect. So this is kind of in the, the behind the scenes, and this is the additional information that a dedicated donation platform beyond, the simple PayPal button or other options can give you. And it really, it's more insights and reports and visuals into how your donations are coming in, when they're coming in, what the amounts are. Some of them include, campaign tracking if you want to target specific campaigns or initiatives, etc. So this is, just a brief preview of some of the behind the scenes stuff that some of these donation platforms can include. And then some of them will even go beyond that and give you, information on individual donors, trends and insights, even down to an individual level. So that's another thing to look for if you're looking at a new donation platform. And then, so going over, so there's donation platforms and then there's payment processors. And for some of you, this might be, a little bit more basic, but there can be a lot of confusion. And so when it comes to out of the box donor platforms usually integrate with something called a payment processor. And that payment processor is the piece that actually processes the credit card transaction securely on your website. And so it handles all of the credit card details, that secure transaction on the back end. And some donation platforms will have their own payment processor, which I think is on the next slide, Courtney. Thank you. So this is an example in Classy Pay where they have their own integrated payment processor. But then others will integrate with some of the more common known payment processors, which are things like Stripe, Square, stuff like that, PayPal, Authorize.net. And so what to look for, if you're choosing a donation platform, if you already have a payment processor that you're using for other things, if you're, with a fiscal sponsor that can only use certain payment processors, it's really important to look at kind of what your options are in terms of payment processing, and if a donation platform has that included, and if it doesn't, which ones it will integrate with. And then just looking at some really basic, thank you. Really basic best practices when it comes to looking at both your donor platform or donation platform and your payment processor. One of the really important ones is recurring donation functionality to give people the option to do a recurring donation. And even beyond that, if you can have that as a default selection, we find that that can kind of improve recurring donations. Ideally as well, it will produce a donation form or page that can be integrated directly into your website. Often things like, a lot of people use PayPal buttons, which are great, and it functions wonderfully, for certain things. But what we see is higher conversion and a little bit higher retention if we can have donation forms that are embedded within the site and they're surrounded by your branding and it's a familiar area. So that's something that's really good to look for if you can integrate it within your existing site and your existing branding. And then again, just making sure it can integrate with a payment processor or payment gateway of your choice if you're already using one of them, or if you have any restrictions on which ones you can use. And then another important feature is if it can integrate with your email marketing tool, and we'll talk about email marketing tools a bit later also. But it can be really helpful if you are able to integrate that with the donation process to have people click a checkbox to add themselves to your mailing list as well to look at future campaigns. And then another important feature, and this is common in a lot of the donation platforms that are kind of dedicated to nonprofits, and that is the ability to have your donors cover the processing fees, because all payment processors will have some sort of credit card transaction fee, and they vary a bit, but they're all pretty much around the same level. But a lot of donation platforms will include a checkbox that says cover the donation fees, and that can make a big impact over time, especially with many smaller donations. And then also another thing to look at is the reporting that a donation platform offers, particularly KPI reports, and what your reporting needs are, monthly actuals, forecasts, number of first-time donors, the percentage of recurring donations, people who have stopped donating. So a lot of that can be really helpful as well as you're looking at long-term trends in your donations.
Yes, sorry for the slide malfunction. My mouse is very sensitive. I just wanted to pause here and quickly note that a relevant sidebar to the conversation around donation platforms is during NewsMatch. We also get a lot of questions about Facebook, like using Facebook fundraisers as your donation platform or as an additional donation platform. And I just wanted to note that there are two types of ways to run a fundraiser on Facebook. The first is as an organization. You can actually set up what they call a fundraiser page on your organization where it's native to the Facebook app, and people can make a donation to your nonprofit through Facebook payments. The second is a personal campaign. You probably see these more often where, like, me as an individual, I'm raising money on behalf of the local food bank or something like that, and I'm inviting my friends to make a gift. And generally, that fundraiser is owned by an individual and not a Facebook page. The difference between the two is pretty critical towards thinking about your long-term strategy. When you set up a fundraiser page as an organization, you're able to get the donor data, their name, their email, and information that you really need to steward them and engage with them and learn about who those supporters are. When you run a Facebook campaign through a personal page, you don't get any of that information. A lot of the information about who's given to the organization, all you get is like a link to their Facebook page. You don't get their email. You aren't able to gather the information to really steward them for the long term. And so we don't really recommend running personal fundraisers unless you're leveraging them as peer-to-peer campaigns, meaning like your board, a member of your board is running a personal fundraiser on Facebook on behalf of your organization. Then they can then deposit the gift as an individual to you at the end of the year.
Hey, Courtney, we've got a few questions
about fiscal sponsorships. Yeah, I want to address this because this is where the caveat occurs. You have to have a 501c3 and be a nonprofit organization to create a fundraiser page on Facebook. This is usually not possible if your organization is fiscally sponsored, mainly because your fiscally sponsored agent has the 501c3 and not your page, or if your organization is is like under university, which again won't be verified to do this. In those cases, we do say that the backup is sort of running a personal campaign, but again, you want to run them as peer-to-peer campaigns, position them as peer-to-peer campaigns versus like your actual institutional destination for people to make donations. You still want to make sure if you have a big and engaged Facebook audience, you don't want to you want to be able to take advantage of that. So I say go for it if that's where your audience is, but you definitely do want to back up donor page if you're not a 501c3, because you just will lose the opportunity to engage with these people, send emails, know who they are. Is it difficult to set up a fundraiser page? I'll ask that to the group. I've never done it before. So newsroom, if anyone on this call has a thought about how hard or difficult it is, feel free to drop it in.
Courtney, I want to jump back to one question quick that came in before the fiscal sponsored ones. And also, Tony, your question about newsletter integration, I sent you a direct message on that. Happy to chat more about that. But Catherine asked, can you share any downsides to using a fundraiser page on Facebook?
Again, I'd leave that to the newsrooms that are here. I mean, my opinion of it is, if your audience is there, you need to meet them where they're at. I think the only downside is if you are leveraging them through a personal fundraising campaign and you don't get the data and information that you're really able to steward these donors. Christina, you have any additional thoughts on Facebook campaigns?
I agree with you, Courtney, on really understanding your audience and meeting them where you are. And I think one of the perennial challenges that we always face with Facebook is we're at the whims of the algorithm. And so what may be the case previously may not be the case this year. And I think you really have to figure out how Facebook fits into your long-term cultivation strategy, especially the type of information that you may get from it, which we'll talk about in a second. What are the best practices in terms of fields and information you should be collecting, and really thinking through, does Facebook offer all of that information that you need, or are you getting, a nice boost in revenue and that's it? I think you have to balance all of those priorities.
Yeah, and there was a question here saying we didn't know that we can get reporting data. You can only get reporting data if you're running a fundraiser page. You do not get reporting data if you run a personal fundraiser. And in the guide, there's a link to Facebook's resources on running a page. And in their resources, you'll find how to pull a report if you're doing it as an organization. I see other downsides. Facebook's slow in sending out payments. It doesn't integrate into your CRM, which is a huge downside. But again, it's not a one size fits all. Some people don't have robust newsletters, and Facebook is where their audience is. So it's sort of something you have to weigh. I do recommend, if you're planning to do this for your year-end campaign, test it. Do a fundraising day, in summer or in August, and just see how it does, see how it feels, see what information you're able to gather, to get a sense of how it works. Are there any more questions that I should answer now, or can we keep moving? If I didn't answer your question about Facebook, ping me, and I'll answer it in the chat. Want to quickly ask people though, also, like, what donation platforms they currently use. I'm sure other people might be looking for ideas. Do you use Classy? Do you use Kindful? Drop it in the chat. And if you can, like, which features do you really love about it, and which are you like, man, this sucks? Because I feel like a lot of the information is going to come from newsrooms exchanging ideas and experiences amongst each other. We only know so much. We're not in your shoes. So anything that you can share that might be helpful to anyone else on the call, we encourage you to do so. Want to drop over to the next slide and talk about the button, the fun part.
Yeah, thank you so much, Courtney. So we've talked about the donation platform itself. We've talked about payment processors. Now I just want to touch a little bit on how to put that into your website and kind of draw people's attention to it. So donation buttons and donation CTAs or calls to action are kind of the trigger to get people to click over to your donate page or into your donate form, either via a direct link, or some of them have kind of pop-up modals that come in, which you can see an example of on the right here. And these can be, placed kind of all over your website. Some of the most common locations I see are either in the header, right at the top of the page, or in your primary navigation. Down in the site footer is also a good place to put it. We tend to see if people make it all the way down to the bottom of your page, they're probably pretty engaged in your content if they've made it all the way down. So that can be a good place to kind of put that call to action one more time, especially if it stands out. And then also, in the sidebar on home pages, but also really important is making sure that you're putting a donate button in your article pages too. Because a lot of people will come direct to your articles and they'll never see your homepage. So if the only place you're calling for donations is on your homepage, you could be missing a lot of target audience if you're not putting it really centrally in your article pages as well. And so some people put that in a sidebar in the article, within the article text, or in kind of what's called the pre-footer, which is at the bottom of the article. Again, with that same kind of logic of if people make it all the way through the article, they're clearly interested in the content that you're putting out there. So just putting one more call to action down there can be really effective. Some people also use pop-ups, especially during NewsMatch, really ideally following pop-up best practices, which I think there's some really good documentation out there. If anyone's curious, get in touch. But there's good ways to do pop-ups and bad ways. That's kind of an overview of where the buttons can go and how they're used. But let's talk about a little bit more about best practices there. So what's really important is keeping it simple. Your donate button should be easy to read. It should be short and succinct. One word: donate, donate now, support us, give now. Something that's small. And then also what's really important is something that's easy to read and an eye-catching color. So I have some examples on the right here where you can see, the site might have blue as their accent color, but putting the donate button in something that's a different color or something even more eye-catching can be really helpful. There's also an example here of, a call to action version of the donate button where this is either in a sidebar or within an article. And again, there's kind of, some really bold colors that make it stand out a bit from the rest of the page and the rest of the things that the eye is catching when you're visiting that website. And again, making it easy to find. They should never have to search for it. I don't think I have seen in a while a news site where there are too many donate buttons. It's actually quite hard to do, especially if you have longer articles and lots of content. You can put it at the top of the page, but once people scroll down, they lose that. So just really making it easy to find. As a site visitor, they should be able to find your donate button within seconds, no matter where they are on your site, especially on article pages. So easy to spot locations, not just your home page again. And then also staying consistent with your donate buttons and where they are on your site can also be helpful. So they always know what to look for. So maybe they'll see it on the home page, and then once they're in an article, reading the article, if they're like, oh, I should donate, let's make it easy to spot. Let's keep that look consistent and really try to make it easy for them to find. It's really the main goal.
Hi, so I'm going to talk about this next section about donation pages and forms. Sometimes we call them checkout pages here at the Hub. And for those of you who aren't familiar with me or my organization, we're the News Revenue Hub. We're a nonprofit that helps newsrooms all over the country build reader revenue programs and loyal audiences. And we actually came out of the nonprofit news space. I used to work at Voice of San Diego, and my colleague Anne-Marie Grisanti, who's also listening in today's webinar, she worked at Insider Louisville. So we've really been in your shoes when it comes to thinking about what tech solutions work best for organizations, especially in that early phase size. And really, what are the things that you should think about as you build your tools with the sole goal of getting people to give you their credit card information as fast as possible? So here's an example of VT Digger. And again, I'll just reinforce the definition that we have here. A donation form is the actual page where donors will select that gift level and enter their information and make a contribution. I'm going to share some examples of 3 organizations that we work with at the Hub, and I want to call out just some best practices. So here is one by Radio Ambulante. They are a podcast with a pretty robust, digital presence, especially through their newsletter. And as Miranda said earlier, there are some best practices, defaulting to recurring amount. And here I wanted to call out that they're defaulting to $15 a month. I think far too often organizations, we kind of undervalue ourselves. We're not sure, do people really want to support us? We're kind of hesitant to ask a little too much, but people will really follow your lead. So be sure to anchor them at an amount higher than that you may be comfortable with, because our research of working with over 70 organizations at the Hub, the average monthly gift is between $10 and $12 a month. So if you anchor at 15 and still give people the option to, adjust that amount, you're giving them, you're able to meet them where they are. And on the right-hand side, you can see different member benefits. This organization, they have a really global audience with listeners all across Latin America and around the world. They're thinking about the type of community that they want to build. And so a lot of their benefits are perks-based, but they're still really easy to execute. I think, depending on where you are as an organization, you're thinking about the tools that make sense for you. Think about the execution. Does launching a full-fledged membership program make sense for you right now? Maybe not, but these benefits could be really easy things to deploy when you're trying to steward and retain your donors. So these are just all these different things to think about. And then the other thing I wanted to call out, at the beginning, they have a really quick intro note. It's not too long because you still want to get people to understand that this is about, making a financial gift. They have a really brief statement that reinforces their mission and value proposition. If you can go to the next page, Courtney. Here is an example of Montana Free Press. They are a regional state house newsroom. And again, you'll see some of the themes that we saw earlier with they have their mission statement, but on the right-hand side, you'll see brief testimonials. And then I also want to just call out the types of member benefits that they're showing here. Being a regional newsroom, they're more access driven. They could be holding virtual or in-person events, hopefully one day, where people can come together and really, connect over that shared vision of what they have for the state and how, and learn more about how the reporting plays a big role in that. This organization is also defaulting to monthly, and it's $15 a month. And go to, I think we have one more. So this last example is from Sahan Journal. You may be familiar with them. They're, a fairly new organization that launched in Minnesota, covering immigrant and refugee stories. And, I don't want to speak for Mukhtar, but I think there are a few things that really jump out to me, with this example versus the other 2 examples. They are a growing team. They are a smaller team, and there are no benefits listed. They're just going straight to donations. And I think that is also a reflection of the capacity of their team and really how this aligns with their goals. And maybe right now, a big priority is getting revenue into the door. And as they have more ability to cultivate this community, that may be something that they introduce later. And I'm just speaking hypothetically, because again, I don't want to speak on behalf of Mukhtar, but these are kind of the things that you can think about as you put together your donation page. For them, I do want to call out that they have anchored the default monthly gift at $20. They are, raising that bar and again, giving people the option. And even though they don't have a lot of information, they still have all the necessary fields for wealth screening, which is your mailing address, email, and your first and your last name.
Hey, Christina, there's a question from somebody on which platform all of these examples are using. Can you just talk about that one more time?
Yeah, so outside of NewsMatch, our team works with about 70 organizations on helping them run membership programs. And this is actually our tools that we use. And we actually build it off of Stripe, but Being in the journalism field, we know these pages are designed specifically for journalism organizations, as well as a backend integration to connect to MailChimp and your newsletters. And I can talk more about that in a bit, but this is News Revenue Hub's checkout pages.
And I'd like to just point to a few other things on this particular slide. Like the first is also that there's this option here for the donor to accept the processing fees. You know, with your payment processor, and you could have your payment processor, say Stripe is your payment processor, they're going to take a percentage of the transaction. And then your donor platform, say your donor platform is DonorBox or GiveGap, they're going to take an additional percentage of the transaction. And it is smart to think about donor platforms that do either default or allow organizations to allow that processing fee to be transferred onto the donor. The other thing I note that isn't also seen here is when someone's giving you your email address and they're making a gift, don't assume that they're already getting your newsletter. You might want to actually give them the option to subscribe to your newsletter at this checkout page, or default them to a subscriber and have them select an item to opt out of subscription. And as Christina was talking about the different giving levels, you know, people gravitate towards the middle. So, you know, that $20 a month is sort of the thing that people's eyes is going to go to. So just be thinking about that being your anchor. And then I dropped in the chat a clever way in which Classy recommends you set the levels, is that your first level is half of that anchor, your third level is twice that anchor, and your fourth level is triple that anchor. But it's just something to think about. The other thing I'd like to just note is that, you know, some organizations, primarily because they're fiscally sponsored or they're just using like a quick PayPal checkout, like they don't have a lot of control over the look and feel, the levels, the processor of their donor form. And I think that's just a reality. I'm curious if anyone's in that position and any workarounds you use. One thing I would note that if you do have a fiscal sponsor, because I've seen where I've gone to a newsroom's page and I click donate, and then I'm on some other organization's website and I'm like, what is this? Am I giving to this university or am I giving to this newsroom? It can be confusing. A way to bridge that sometimes is creating a landing page. I don't think you need a landing page if you have a strong donor form, but sometimes you can create sort of an intermediary that sort of explains your mission, your member benefits and values, and then educates people that you are fiscally sponsored. And when you actually process your gift, you're going to be heading over to INN, for example. The other thing is, if you are fiscally sponsored, you might be able to allow, like your fiscal sponsor might allow you to link a donor platform to their payment processor. So for example, if your fiscal sponsor uses PayPal or uses Stripe, you might be able to set up Give WP, or you might be able to set up DonorBox and link to their particular PayPal or Stripe account and still have control over your page. So just things to think about. I want to quickly move to the last item, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's the newsletter marketing tool. Newsletters are one of the driving forces that we see in converting your engaged readers and subscribers to donors. The average News Revenue Hub has pulled data, and like the average conversion rate of someone visiting your website to making a gift is 1%. But the average conversion rate for someone who is subscribed to your email making a donation is 9%. And you might even be surprised by how low that is. And but just to note that like emails are highly more effective at converting your engaged subscribers to supporters. That's why we think it's really important for you to, in July, August, and September, be building your email list. We did a webinar on this last year on how to grow your email list that we can drop in the chat. of ways to build this, but just know there are different types of email systems you can use. MailChimp is largely popular, and it integrates with other donor platforms. It integrates with CRMs. It gives you the power of segmenting your subscribers. But Constant Contact, Sendinblue are also available options. And then the last two I have, yet another MailMerge and GMass. These are mailing systems that allow you to personalize mass emails. So it looks like it's coming from you, an individual, but you can basically, kind of like back in the day, you could mail merge letters in a Word doc. You can do the same with emails, where it looks like someone's getting a personal note from you, but it actually is a mass email campaign. This is really useful if you're starting up and you don't have a strong newsletter list. You can kind of engage your personal network in this way, or if your organization doesn't have a robust newsletter subscription list, or is just starting up, and you're able to like engage people in your personal network in a smarter way. We found this to be effective last year. Here's an example of sort of that mail merge. I want to quickly skip to here are best practices that you can see in the guide. Just, you want to be able to customize your email templates. You want to be able to quickly allow people to subscribe to your email with pop-ups or buttons on your website. And then again, easily segment your subscribers. That way you're not sending "please give to us" emails to people who have already made a gift. One thing we aren't going to spend a lot of time talking about that I just want to acknowledge is that there also is a customer or donor relationship management software, or CRM, that sort of ties all these different parts together. You know, you could be in a situation where your donor platform, your donor button is an HTML code, your donor platform is ran by your fiscal sponsor, your newsletter list you independently own and is not tied to anything, which is fine if that's where you're at. What a CRM really does is tie all these things together so that you're able to track donor interactions across all the platforms. When you have a CRM, you're able to say, like, did this donor go to an event and subscribe to our newsletter, and do they follow us on Facebook, and when did they make their gift? Are they right for us to ask them to increase their support? It gives you all these really intelligent insights for you to like just supercharge your donation process. And it also can give you like insight into the profile of each donor. And you can also build in workflows like to-do items, like for this donor in December, we need to send a Christmas card. You can sort of tag that and actually create task management within a CRM. That is not necessary to run a 2-month year-end campaign. However, it is quite necessary if you're thinking about the long-term sustainability of your organization. And there are things that you can do now to set up your year-end campaign to make sure that you're in a good position when you have a CRM. Sometimes that's like making sure you're collecting the right donor data at this time, as well as making sure you're selecting donation tools that can be integrated into a CRM further along the line. I want to quickly just jump to our last slide, one of our last slides before we jump into more Q&A, but just to note that there's no one size fits all. Like, I'm cognizantly aware that we have members that don't even have newsletters. You know, they distribute their news through SMS text. They don't have websites with content. They're engaging their community in person through events. So these are best practices that sort of are a standard, but we really encourage newsrooms to adapt, modify, cross out the line and say, this does not work for us. I think that is completely fine. What we hope you do, that if you are doing that, share through the listserv, share with us so we can spread to the listserv how you're modifying some of these things, how you're adapting and tweaking some of these things to work for your particular organization. Because the likelihood is that if, that's how I learned of yet another mail merge. A newsroom has said, like, these newsletters aren't working for us, but we're starting to do these mail merge emails, personalized emails, and they're having greater return. If you share that with us, like, we're going to share it out with others, because we can work together in partnership to really figure out what works for different types of newsrooms. I want to say, like, as our next steps, before we close and open up for Q&A over the last 10 minutes, this webinar is recorded. It will go out after this meeting, likely on Friday, a recording as well as links to the things that we shared. But it's really part of like a suite of resources and services that we're trying to curate on basically donor systems and donor pages. So this webinar is one of them. The guide is another, which we shared earlier. But the second and third on this slide are really exciting to announce, which is that we have consultation services available for you. So they're free. So if you want to set up a one-on-one consultation with Miranda, you can set up with her and say, like, here's what you all shared. Here are the pieces I have. Here are the pieces I don't have. What should I be focusing on? Miranda is really well versed in sort of guiding strategy and ideas. And then in addition to guiding strategy and ideas, say, Miranda says, well, you really need to adopt this widget on your website. We also have development resources where we can deploy a web developer to do that for you. Again, this is free and offset as a NewsMatch participant. So I really encourage you, like, if you've gone through this webinar and you're like, wow, we've got a lot to do, or really what should be my first step, I really encourage you to start with that consultation with Miranda. A link to, set one up has been dropped in the chat. And if it is determined that you need additional development support, or you have a developer and you need just financial support to make, to deploy that, we do have resources available, but those are only unlocked through the consultation process. So set up your consultation with Miranda. I think this is one of the most exciting announcements of today, is that, we're making these changes, but we want to make sure that you're able to be successful despite. So want to stop there and pause and answer questions that you all may have. Feel free to drop them in the chat.
Yeah, so there's one I want to circle. Yeah, there's a couple I've been eyeing up and want to circle back to. Christine, I saw your question. How do folks deal with asking donors to cover the fees associated with these payment services? So often donor platforms will just have a little checkbox, and I think there was one example on the slides there where it's really just they can check a box and say, I would like to cover the fees. Does that cover your question, or did you have additional? Feel free to drop it in the chat if that doesn't cover it. Somebody else asked what the cost of News Revenue Hub is. Christina, I know you dropped a link in to find out more about News Revenue Hub. So if you want to maybe just drop that in the chat again, so it's visible.
And I would also add, Christina, would you mind just sharing more about, you have a really robust tool that's like all the bells and whistles, but you're also thinking about other ways to help bridge newsrooms who are at the startup phase to get to that CRM phase. Can you talk a little bit more about how you can support newsrooms, in that technology?
Yeah, and I just want to put out the disclaimer that I don't intend for this to be a hub commercial. And, Anne-Marie and I, we spend a lot of time talking to organizations, and we want to just be a resource. So just to share a little bit more about what we're working on. So we, there are some hub members who are in this webinar today. We have a tech stack that we created many years ago that uses Salesforce, MailChimp, and Stripe. And it gets programs, those programs to talk to another. It's fully integrated. But as, I love, Courtney, when you were like, if you don't have all of these things, that's perfectly okay. And I think one of the things that we've learned, especially over the last year, thinking about the need and reliance on local independent journalism, and then the newsrooms not really having the ability to quickly launch campaigns or stand up reader revenue programs, or even having streamlined tools to have donors support you, especially last year, either during COVID or during really amazing election coverage. It has been really part of our mission to respond to the needs of the industry. So what we are working on is creating a lighter version of our tools that just is built off of Stripe and MailChimp. And so you'll have the ability to create checkout pages similar to the ones that I walked through today, and eventually integrate with your newsletters on MailChimp. So you can do automated campaigns or even really robust segmentation and even get some light reporting. This is all in development. And so if you are interested in needing some sort of tool to be able to accept donations, kind of replacing your GiveGab page, feel free to send me an email. I'm Christina@fundedjournalism.org. It's in my little name right there. And I'm happy to set up a time to talk and even help you think through what tools you might need that are really reflective of where you are in your growth as an organization, as well as the capacity of your team.
The other thing I wanted to know, there was a question earlier about whether, we're sunsetting GiveGab, our work with GiveGab, whether we would consider maybe finding another tool. And at this time, we're not really headed in that direction. What we feel like our value proposition is actually going to be more helping the public and funders find your newsroom. Once they get to you, we believe that newsrooms are really in a better position to identify the tools and processes that are going to fit their operations to accept donations and process donations. So we're sort of removing ourselves from the donor processing technology and more so thinking about the destination. But there's sort of like a bridge there. And the bridge that we're offering is these support resources to help you identify what's a good fit, to provide development resources to implement what is a good fit. So it's kind of like, we're not going to be providing like, here's the tool that all you all should be using, because the reality is we really can't find one that would actually be of value to all of INN members, because you all are just so diverse. So we're focusing on, like, the website is really going to be about a discovery driver for people to learn about your organization. Once they get to you, it's up to you to define how you want the process, and we're going to be there to back you up. Any other questions? Do you know of any CRMs besides Allegiance that have public radio specific reporting tools? Robin, such a great question. I previously worked at WDET and we used Allegiance software as well. And it's challenging because it's really designed to be a broadcasting tool, and it's really designed with public media in mind. And it's not, they are building other features like MailChimp integration and everything is great, but there are limitations when it comes to digital fundraising, like modifying the donor form, for example. Christina, I'm curious, do you have public media organizations that are operating dually, like they're using one system for broadcast and a different system for digital? Or in your world, do you see public media organizations maybe even foregoing those traditional CRMs and adopting more digital first ones?
Yeah, a little bit more of the latter. I think, everything around us is changing so fast, and there are some public media stations out there that are a little bit more experimental with, launching their digital, digital properties that have a different purpose and strategy than what's, that traditional pledge drive. And that may require a different tool. Sometimes, it's nice to just start from a clean slate. And I would just say in general, don't let the tools hold you back from asking for money. But I think sometimes that's the predicament that some of these legacy organizations face.
Yeah, and I would just say, I think sometimes the function of a lot of these CRMs is just as robust as Allegiance, but really the challenge is the learning curve, the data migration, the changing the culture of the organization to you know, utilize the new tool. I think that's more the greater challenge than like what these tools are capable of doing in and of themselves. Someone's hands raised. Yeah, feel free. I don't know. Can you unmute yourself? If you have your hand raised and you can unmute yourself, feel free to state your question, and if not, drop it in the chat.
Also, Courtney, while we're waiting for other questions, if people come up with questions after this webinar, what is the best place for them to reach out?
The best place to reach out is hello@newsmatch.org. You can also, like, we have a support site. Someone asked us earlier, like, where is all this information? We call it NewsMatch HQ headquarters, but this is where we curate all of our resources that we release. Our webinar schedule is soon to be uploaded here, and the recording of this webinar, the guide's already there. This is sort of like the one-stop destination, and it's got a really cool search tool that makes it really easy to find what you're looking for. And there's a contact button there that also points you to hello@newsmatch.org. So with that said, we've got a minute to go, and just want to thank everybody for joining us today. Again, we'll send out a recap, and if other questions arise, you know, feel free to reach out to us. Thank you all so much.